November 1942. The North Atlantic churned with waves reaching heights of 15 meters, driven by winds exceeding 120 kilometers per hour. Captain Heinrich Weber stood on the conning tower of his submarine, watching the distant silhouettes of merchant vessels struggling against nature's fury. No ship can survive this storm, he thought to himself, a grim satisfaction settling over him. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Weber didn't know was that this convoy would not only survive the tempest, but would teach him that courage and determination could overcome even the most sophisticated hunting tactics of the underwater warfare campaign. The convoy, designated SC-107, consisted of 42 merchant ships carrying vital supplies from Halifax to Liverpool. Leading the escort group was Commander Robert Sherwood aboard the destroyer HMS Vanquisher, a veteran of 18 Atlantic crossings. Sherwood had earned his reputation through careful planning and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate threats. That morning, as meteorological reports predicted the worst storm of the season, many officers in the Canadian port suggested postponing departure. Sherwood disagreed. The convoy includes 3,000 tons of aircraft parts, Sherwood explained to his executive officer, Lieutenant James Morrison. They're waiting for those Spitfire components in Britain. Every day we delay is another day the Royal Air Force flies with reduced squadrons. Morrison, a former merchant marine officer who had joined the Royal Navy after his previous ship was torpedoed 9 months earlier, understood the weight of that decision. He had seen friends die in the icy waters of the Atlantic. He knew what they were risking. Among the merchant vessels was the SS Northumberland Star, a Liberty ship captained by 48-year-old Thomas Henley. Henley had crossed the Atlantic 37 times since the conflict began. His weathered face and steady hands reflected a lifetime at sea. In his cabin, secured in a locked drawer, he kept letters from his wife Margaret and their 3 daughters in Portsmouth. He reread them before every crossing, a ritual that reminded him what he was sailing home to. The engineering officer of the Northumberland Star was a young Scottish man named Douglas MacLeod, 24 years old, who had graduated top of his class from the Glasgow Maritime Academy just weeks before the conflict erupted. MacLeod possessed an intuitive understanding of steam engines that bordered on the mystical. He could diagnose problems by sound alone, distinguishing between the normal rhythm of pistons and the first whispers of mechanical failure. His crew joked that he could hear a bearing wearing out from 3 decks away. As the convoy departed Halifax on that grey November morning, Weber's submarine was already positioned along their projected route. Weber, 36 years old, was considered one of the most effective submarine commanders in the German fleet. He had participated in 21 patrols and was credited with sinking 18 merchant vessels totaling 94,000 tons. His crew of 48 men trusted him absolutely. His first watch officer, Oberleutnant Karl Fischer, had served with him for 2 years and could anticipate his commander's decisions with uncanny accuracy. The storm intensified throughout the first day. Waves crashed over the bows of merchant ships, sending spray that froze instantly on metal surfaces. The convoy maintained a tight formation despite the conditions, each vessel keeping station with precision that impressed even the most skeptical observers. Sherwood had organized the convoy into 9 columns of 4 to 5 ships each, with the escorts forming a protective screen around the perimeter. The arrangement maximized defensive coverage while minimizing the target profile. Weber watched through his periscope as the convoy struggled against the elements. His submarine rode relatively comfortably beneath the surface turbulence, insulated from the worst of the storm. Under these conditions, Weber explained to Fischer, the escort ships cannot use their detection equipment effectively. The storm noise masks our engines completely. The merchant ships will be too busy fighting the weather to maintain proper lookouts. We can approach to point-blank range, without detection. Fischer nodded, consulting the charts spread across the small navigation table. The storm is moving northeast at approximately 40 kilometers per hour, he observed. If we position ourselves ahead of the convoy and wait for them to sail into the calm zone behind the storm front, we'll have perfect attack conditions. Clear visibility, exhausted crews, ships scattered by the rough seas. It's an ideal scenario. What neither Weber nor Fisher anticipated was that Sherwood had made the same meteorological calculations. The commander understood that the storm represented both danger and opportunity. While his escort vessels would struggle to maintain anti-submarine patrols in the heavy seas, the storm also provided concealment from German reconnaissance aircraft. More importantly, Sherwood knew that submarine commanders often tried to position themselves ahead of convoys to wait in calmer waters. He had studied their tactics obsessively. As night fell on the second day, the storm reached its peak intensity. Aboard the Northumberland Star, MacLeod worked continuously in the engine room, maintaining steam pressure as the ship's bow rose and plunged through massive waves. The temperature in the engine room exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, and the air was thick with steam and coal dust. MacLeod's assistant, a Welsh teenager named Evan Price, struggled to keep his footing as the ship rolled 45 degrees to port, then 40 degrees to starboard in a sickening rhythm. Captain Henley stood on the bridge, gripping the handrails, as green water swept across the deck. The helmsman, a Norwegian named Olaf Larsen, who had been torpedoed twice before and survived both times, fought the wheel with both hands. The ship's compass swung wildly, and visibility was reduced to less than 50 meters. Through breaks in the spray, Henley caught glimpses of the vessel ahead, the SS Manchester Pride, struggling through identical conditions. On the HMS Vanquisher, Sherwood remained on the bridge for 36 consecutive hours. Morrison brought him hot tea at regular intervals and tried to convince him to rest, but the commander refused. "I can sleep when we reach Liverpool," Sherwood said quietly. "Right now, 42 ships depend on our decisions." Morrison understood. He had made his own choice to remain at his station, fighting exhaustion with coffee and determination. The storm began to abate on the morning of the third day. As Weber had predicted, the convoy emerged into relatively calm waters, scattered across several kilometers of ocean. This was the moment he had waited for. "Surface to periscope depth," Weber ordered. "Prepare tubes 1 through 4. We'll engage the straggling vessels first, then submerge before the escorts can respond." But as the submarine rose toward the surface, Fisher suddenly gripped Weber's arm. "Herr Kalu," Fisher whispered urgently, using the naval abbreviation for captain. "Propeller sounds bearing 320. Close range, very close." Weber pressed his eye to the periscope and felt his blood turn cold. Less than 800 meters away, positioned exactly where he had planned to surface, was HMS Vanquisher. The destroyer was moving slowly, methodically patrolling the area where any submarine would logically wait. "Flood tanks," Weber ordered immediately. "Take us deep." Emergency descent. The submarine tilted sharply downward as compressed air was released and seawater flooded the ballast tanks. The crew grabbed handholds as the deck angled 30 degrees down. Fisher watched the depth gauge needle swing rapidly past 50 meters, then 100, then 150. Above them they could hear the destroyer's engines, a menacing rumble that filled the submarine's pressure hull. Sherwood had gambled correctly. Instead of keeping his escorts close to the convoy in the rough seas, he had positioned them ahead, exactly where submarine commanders would try to set up their attacks. The tactic was risky, because it left portions of the convoy temporarily less protected, but Sherwood had calculated that the deterrent effect would be more valuable than close escort. After 30 minutes of silent running at depth, Weber surfaced again, this time 3 kilometers from his original position. But again, a destroyer appeared, this time HMS Protector, another escort vessel that Sherwood had positioned with precise calculation. Weber was forced to dive again, wasting precious battery power and losing position relative to the convoy. Throughout the day, Weber attempted 7 different approaches. Each time he found escort vessels blocking his path. It was as if Sherwood could read his mind, anticipating every tactical decision. By evening, Weber's batteries were depleted to dangerous levels, and his crew was exhausted from the repeated diving and surfacing cycles. The convoy, meanwhile, had reformed into tight columns and was making steady progress toward Britain. In the Northumberland Star's engine room, MacLeod had finally identified a concerning vibration in the main drive shaft. He explained the situation to Captain Henley through the voice tube. "We have a bearing that's heating up," MacLeod reported. If it fails, we'll lose propulsion entirely. We need to reduce speed to 75% to prevent catastrophic failure. Henley faced an impossible choice. Reducing speed meant falling behind the convoy's protection. But losing propulsion entirely meant becoming a stationary target. Sherwood, monitoring all communications between convoy vessels, immediately responded. Northumberland Star, this is Vanquisher. Reduced to required speed for machinery preservation. HMS Protector will drop back to provide close escort. You're not going to be alone out there. Henley felt relief wash over him as the destroyer altered course to take station alongside his struggling merchant ship. That decision saved both vessels. 2 hours after sunset, Weber finally achieved an ideal attack position. Through his periscope, he identified a target silhouette isolated from the main convoy. Perfect, he whispered to Fisher. Single merchant vessel, no escorts visible. Range 2,000 meters and closing. Prepare for surface attack. We'll use the deck gun to conserve torpedoes. The submarine surfaced 800 meters from what Weber believed was a vulnerable merchant ship. But as his crew scrambled to man the deck gun, floodlights suddenly blazed from both sides. HMS Protector had been positioned with lights extinguished, invisible in the darkness, specifically to protect the Northumberland Star. Before Weber's gunners could fire a single shot, shells from the destroyer's main armament bracketed the submarine. Crash dive, Weber roared. All hands below. The submarine's conning tower was already taking hits from the destroyer's secondary guns as the last crewman tumbled through the hatch. The submarine descended rapidly, but not before suffering damage to the pressure hull and flooding in the aft torpedo room. Weber and his crew spent the next 4 hours evading depth charges, each explosion sending shock waves through the hull that threatened to burst the damaged seams. By dawn of the 4th day, Weber made the difficult decision to break off the attack entirely. His submarine was damaged, his batteries nearly exhausted, and his crew was approaching the limits of human endurance. He had not sunk a single ship. As he set course for the German-controlled port in France, he found himself replaying every decision, trying to understand how he had been so completely outmaneuvered. The convoy reached Liverpool 6 days after departing Halifax. All 42 merchant vessels arrived safely, delivering their precious cargo of aircraft components, medical supplies, machine tools, and food. It was one of the few convoys during that period of the conflict to achieve 0 losses despite being tracked by German submarines throughout the voyage. Captain Henley and his crew of the Northumberland Star received commendations for their seamanship in maintaining formation despite mechanical difficulties. MacLeod, the young engineering officer, was recognized for his skill in preventing catastrophic machinery failure through careful diagnosis and bold decision-making under pressure. His bearing had indeed been failing, exactly as he predicted, and post-voyage inspection confirmed that running at reduced speed had prevented total propulsion loss at the worst possible time. Commander Sherwood submitted a detailed after-action report that became required reading at the Western Approaches training facility. His tactic of positioning escorts ahead of convoys rather than around them represented a significant evolution in anti-submarine warfare doctrine. The report analyzed weather patterns, submarine attack profiles, and the psychological factors that influenced enemy commander decision-making. Within 3 months, similar tactics were being employed throughout the Atlantic convoy system. Weber survived the conflict and spent his final years teaching maritime history at the University of Hamburg. In 1968, he published a memoir that included detailed accounts of his wartime service. The chapter about Convoy SC-107 was titled "The Storm I Could Not Master." In it, Weber wrote with remarkable candor about his encounter with Sherwood. I had assumed, Weber wrote, that superior technology and training would guarantee success. I believed the storm would be my ally, concealing my approach and scattering the convoy into vulnerable targets. What I failed to account for was that the commander of the escort group understood both the ocean and submarine tactics better than I understood them myself. He used the same storm I relied upon as a tool to position his forces precisely where they would be most effective. The merchant ships, despite their slower speed and weaker armament, displayed seamanship that equaled anything in the German fleet. They maintained formation in conditions that should have scattered them across 200 kilometers of ocean. When machinery failed aboard one vessel, the escort commander adapted instantly, protecting the vulnerable ship without abandoning the larger convoy. I was not defeated by superior firepower or technology. I was defeated by superior leadership, seamanship, and an understanding that courage means protecting others rather than seeking glory for oneself. Years later, Webber and Sherwood met at a naval history conference in Southampton. The two men, once mortal enemies separated by 300 meters of dark water, spoke for hours about their shared experience. Sherwood explained his tactical reasoning, describing how he had studied German submarine patrol reports captured from other engagements. Webber in turn explained his frustration at having every approach anticipated and blocked. "You made me feel," Webber told Sherwood, "as if you were reading my thoughts before I thought them. Every time I believed I had found the perfect attack position, one of your ships was already there. It was the most professionally humbling experience of my service." Sherwood smiled and responded, "You taught me that submarine commanders are not reckless gamblers but careful strategists. Understanding that allowed me to predict your moves. The storm was brutal to everyone, but we used it as a shield while you tried to use it as a sword. Perhaps that made all the difference." The engineering officer MacLeod continued his maritime career after the conflict, eventually becoming chief engineer on passenger liners crossing the Atlantic. He never forgot that voyage aboard the Northumberland Star, particularly the moment when Captain Henley made the difficult decision to reduce speed despite the danger. In interviews later in life, MacLeod emphasized that safety and machinery preservation sometimes required choices that seemed counterintuitive. "Slowing down in the middle of dangerous waters feels wrong," MacLeod explained. "Every instinct tells you to run at full speed towards safety, but sometimes the wisest decision is to acknowledge limitations and trust that others will provide protection while you address critical problems." Captain Henley and Commander Sherwood understood that principle. It kept us alive. The 42 ships of Convoy SC-107 represented more than just transportation assets. They carried people, each with families and futures that depended on their safe arrival. The escorts protecting them were not anonymous warships, but vessels crewed by individuals who had chosen to face danger repeatedly in defense of others. The submarine attempting to attack them was operated by men who believed they were serving their nation honorably. The ocean itself, with its massive storms and brutal indifference to human conflict, reminded everyone involved that nature remained the ultimate adversary, regardless of political allegiances. The legacy of that convoy extended beyond immediate military success. The tactical innovations Sherwood developed influenced anti-submarine warfare doctrine for decades. The seamanship displayed by merchant crews like Henley's demonstrated that civilian mariners could perform with military precision when properly organized and led. The submarine service, for its part, learned that technology and training could not overcome fundamental strategic disadvantages when facing determined and intelligent opposition. Perhaps most significantly, the encounter highlighted how human factors ultimately determined outcomes in mechanized warfare. Webber's submarine represented cutting-edge technology and Germany's considerable investment in underwater combat systems. The merchant ships were essentially floating warehouses, slow and vulnerable. Yet organization, leadership, weather forecasting, tactical innovation, and mutual support transformed those vulnerable vessels into an unstoppable force. The storm that Webber believed would guarantee his success instead became the element that concealed Sherwood's defensive preparations. Historians studying the Atlantic convoy campaign often focus on statistics such as tonnage sunk, submarines destroyed, or supplies delivered. These numbers matter, but they obscure the human dimension of the struggle. Every ship that successfully completed its voyage represented hundreds of individual decisions, countless hours of vigilant watchkeeping, mechanical ingenuity in maintaining aging machinery, and the accumulated expertise of seamen who understood their vessels and the ocean with intimate familiarity. The conflict at sea was not primarily about combat or destruction. It was about transportation, logistics, and the patient work of moving essential materials across dangerous waters. The escorts existed not to hunt submarines, but to enable safe passage. The submarine crews sought not glory but strategic impact through economic warfare. The merchant mariners wanted simply to deliver their cargoes and return home alive. When these different objectives collided during a North Atlantic storm in November 1942, the outcome was determined by who better understood the fundamental nature of the challenge they faced. Sherwood understood that his primary mission was protection rather than aggression. By positioning his forces to deter attack rather than to hunt submarines, he acknowledged that prevention was more valuable than destruction. Weber, despite his considerable skill and experience, approached the situation as a hunting opportunity, seeking the perfect moment to strike, rather than considering how his opponent might deny him that opportunity entirely. The difference in perspective proved decisive. The storm itself served as a metaphor for the larger conflict. Both sides faced identical environmental conditions, identical dangers from wind and waves and cold. The storm did not discriminate based on nationality or ideology. It tested everyone equally. Those who respected its power and adapted their tactics accordingly survived and succeeded. Those who tried to exploit it without fully understanding its complexity found themselves struggling against forces they could not control. In the decades since that November crossing, the North Atlantic has seen countless storms of equal or greater intensity. Modern weather forecasting and ship construction have made such voyages dramatically safer, but the fundamental challenges remain unchanged. The ocean still demands respect, careful planning and humility from those who venture upon its surface. The lessons learned by Sherwood, Weber, Henley and McLeod during those 4 days in 1942 remain relevant to anyone who goes to sea for any purpose. The convoy system itself represented a philosophical approach to security through mutual support. Rather than allowing ships to cross independently and rely on their own defenses, the system gathered vulnerable vessels together under organized protection. This required merchant captains to surrender some autonomy, accepting orders from naval commanders and maintaining assigned positions, even when their instincts might suggest different courses of action. The success of Convoy SC-107 validated that approach, demonstrating that cooperation and discipline could overcome individual vulnerability. For the families waiting in Liverpool and other British ports, the arrival of that convoy meant different things. Some welcomed home fathers, husbands or sons who had survived another dangerous crossing. Others simply experienced relief that essential supplies were arriving, maintaining the lifeline that kept Britain functioning despite years of conflict. The aircraft components delivered by the Northumberland Star and her companions allowed factories to complete planes that would later contribute to air superiority over Europe. The medical supplies saved lives in hospitals across the nation. The machine tools enabled production of equipment that equipped forces throughout the Allied coalition. Each successful convoy created ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate achievement of safe passage. Weber's submarine crew, having survived their damaged voyage back to port, faced lengthy repairs and intense questioning about why they had failed to achieve any successes against such a large target. Weber defended his crew vigorously, explaining that they had encountered exceptionally skilled opposition rather than displaying any failure of courage or competence. His honesty in those debriefings contributed to eventual tactical adjustments in German submarine operations, though by that stage of the conflict, Allied anti-submarine capabilities were improving faster than Axis forces could adapt. The meteorologists who had predicted the storm's path and intensity played an unsung role in the convoy's success. Their forecasts allowed Sherwood to plan his escort positioning with accurate knowledge of when and where conditions would improve. This intersection of scientific analysis and tactical implementation demonstrated how modern warfare increasingly depended on information as much as firepower. The side with better weather prediction, more accurate intelligence, and superior communication often prevailed regardless of relative combat strength. In the engine rooms, radio compartments, galley kitchens, and cargo holds of those 42 merchant ships, hundreds of individuals performed their duties with little awareness of the tactical chess game unfolding around them. They knew they were crossing dangerous waters during a violent storm, but most never learned how close German submarines had come to attacking their vessels. They understood their roles as firemen, cooks, radio operators, or deckhands contributed to the larger mission, but they could not see the complete picture. Their professionalism in executing routine tasks created the foundation upon which commanders like Sherwood built successful defensive operations. This principle applies beyond maritime operations. Any complex undertaking requires both strategic vision and flawless execution of mundane tasks. The most brilliant tactical plan fails if engines break down, if communications fail, if crews become exhausted beyond effectiveness. Conversely, perfect execution of basic duties creates options and flexibility for leaders to exploit opportunities and overcome obstacles. The interplay between high-level decision-making and detailed implementation determined outcomes in warfare, just as it determines success or failure in any organized human endeavor. The story of Convoy SC-107 ultimately transcends its specific historical context. It illustrates universal principles about leadership, adaptation, cooperation, and the triumph of preparation over assumptions. Weber assumed the storm would provide tactical advantage without considering how his opponent might use identical conditions defensively. Sherwood prepared for multiple contingencies and positioned resources where they would be most effective. Henley made difficult decisions about his ship's machinery based on technical reality rather than wishful thinking. MacLeod diagnosed problems accurately and implemented solutions that prioritized long-term functionality over short-term performance. Each of these decisions, made independently by different individuals facing different immediate challenges, combined to create an outcome that none of them could have achieved alone. The convoy succeeded, not because any single person performed heroically, but because dozens of competent professionals executed their responsibilities with skill and discipline while supporting each other through mutual challenges. This collaborative achievement under difficult conditions represents the best of human capability when people work toward common purposes despite danger and hardship. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.